Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a subject I've covered a number of times, but I want to come back to it, which is the issue of, because of mass migration and the type of mass migration coming into the West, the idea of voting, holding political office, civic duty, all these sorts of things have now, have become like a whole new debate. It's not like it was where the migration to Western countries was presumed to be, and there were some controls on it, where you had to be, preferably white, and you certainly had to be Christian or come from a Christian country. You had to want to leave the place that you were in and come and find a new life. That was very important. You're having a new life here when you come to, for example, the United States or even Australia and so on, Canada and the like. You wanted a new life. You wanted to be part of a new society. You wanted to be very much that. And of course, nearly everybody was white. With a few light brown people, say swarthy Mediterraneaners or something like that. But this was. Other than Jewish people coming in, say, particularly in the United States, the 1880s, 1890s, the Russian pogroms and so on, everybody coming in, with very rare exception, was Christian. And so there was a common bond there, nearly all white, a common bond there, European, West European, common bond there, and so on. So there were many common bonds, but one of the key common bonds was you were starting a new life. That was absolutely key. Not like the modern day mass migration, which is purely, I want to go to the rich white country to parasite off it and live the same life that I did, in the shithole that I came from. So very, very different type of immigration and migration today, illegal or not. Now, if you look at, say, the migrants coming from, I don't know, Sweden or Germany or France or places like that, Britain. Some of them were moving because of, say, religious beliefs. They wanted to, they were Christian and they wanted to be free to the Lutherans, as a case in point. They felt they were getting a bit of a rough deal, and so they came over into places like Minnesota and around Minneapolis, that sort of thing. So there were various enclaves of people seeking a better life, sure, but also looking at, again, the Pilgrim Fathers, for example, original pilgrims coming to the United States. So there was a lot of, on many instances, people were coming to the US and again, to the New World, be it Australia or Canada, or wherever, on that basis that they wanted to leave the old world behind. Not that they didn't still like to eat the food that they'd once eaten. There were cuisine issues, but the Jews with their bagels or something. But it was nonetheless the new life. Now, there's very few groups, possibly the Jews really being the only one, who wanted to hang on to their religion, their way of life, their attitudes, their views, hang on to the bleeding scabs and hurts of the past. That's the thing. Jews were probably unique in that sense. The others were able to sort of bleed it out of their system over time and very much embrace the new world and that new society. So let's look at today, though. I was quite surprised and shocked to. No, shocked is the right word. I was thinking it might be an overstatement, but it's not. There was a youngish guy, about 30, I guess, who'd been elected, I think, to a state congress in the United States, and his grandparents had come from Mexico, and he spoke with a Latina, Mexican Spanish accent. Still, I mean, so he claims. His parents came as young, like late teens, early 20s to America. Well, I'm not sure it was legal or not, but his parents were born in the United States. He was born in the United States, but he still talks in a Latino accent. When he makes speeches, he makes it very, very clear as he speaks in his Latino accent that he's here to represent Latinos and Mexicans and Spanish-speaking peoples and so on. He's not there to represent the American voter or anything like that. He is a tribal representative of his racial diaspora and his Latino diaspora. He is there to get benefits for them, to represent them, to argue their requirements in the legislature, to legislate on their behalf, and so on. Now, in the United States, how many people like that can you actually have in your your legislature? How did the person even get elected? Now, it was presumed years ago that if you weren't a straight white male Christian, your chances of getting elected to anything were pretty slim, because that was the aspect. It was a white Christian country. Sure, there were the percentage of the population had been brought over from Africa, from mostly West Africa. But effectively, it was a straight white male Christian country. That was it. Now, if someone around the world sort of didn't like that or thought, no, I don't want to go there, straight, then they would stay wherever they were or go somewhere else. The mass migration thing has completely changed that equation. Now, NGOs and globalist activist organizations and groups brazenly and aggressively funneling third world black and brown people into the West and to turn the West into an open resource for the third world peasants. And that's completely changed the makeup of the citizenry, the voting, and so on. Now, when you've got grandchildren still talking in an accent in the United States, and how could you even do that? Still have a Latino accent? Maybe he bungs it on, I don't know. But how can you have that and, again, brazenly and blatantly claiming that you're going to represent your Hispanic diaspora and you come from a Hispanic enclave and ghetto, then what is being accomplished that adds value, any value of any sort, to the United States and its wider citizenry, its civic responsibilities, its government, its allocation of resources, and so on? Nothing. It's a negative. It's a complete negative. You have politicians that say, well, I just represent the brown people that vote in my district ghetto. I mean, that's like what is that? That was never envisaged. No one ever imagined something like that could happen. But it is, and it does. And I think I know it's getting worse. Now, I guess there are two issues here. One is people that come to the West from wherever, come to the West and they gain citizenship. And the bar to gain citizenship is lowered, and lowered. So to the point where someone barely speaks a word of English and they can still get citizenship. They live in some, Arabic or Hispanic ghetto and they still can, and so on. And there are, cheat sheets they can take with them. Some of these citizenship papers are done online, so they can do all the cheating they want to get citizenship. And I can't see how this benefits anybody. But once they become citizens, they can then stand for political office. Now, the assumption always was, when citizenship and voting rights and political office were considered, it was always assumed that straight white Christians would be the people that were standing for office and voting. But the white people who were standing for public office also had a tradition of public service. The people today that come from the third world countries, they have not even the slightest concept of public service, let alone a tradition of it. So their perspective is to get into political office and so they can get at the resources, they can loot the treasury and get their hands on all the goodies. That's their sole motivation. That they're not there for anything else, and they're not shy about declaring it, and get their hands on the loot for their own diaspora, where they'll be considered big honchos in their little ghetto enclave. So the very basis of what citizenship meant and political office and how it would come about and so on, the mass migration was never considered, was never seen as even a possibility. especially the brown and black, and from countries but all the countries that were made up, not all, but nearly all the countries that made up the United States had a concept of civic duty and civic responsibility and all these sorts of things that didn't exist in other countries. Now, not that it was perfect, or that all people from Eastern Europe and so on didn't necessarily have that same concept, but they were sufficiently small in number to be integrated into the whole. And again, the idea was you're leaving that old world and old thing behind when you're coming to the new. You're now an American. You're not a Polish American. You're now an American, and that was also important. So these smaller numbers could be integrated and incorporated in the whole. So you wouldn't hear a Polish guy who had some role in government say, well, I just represent the Polish people in this or that district. That would have seemed absurd, but it's not absurd to the Hispanic people, the tribal people, the third world people, the Arabs, the Africans, the Indians, the Pakistanis. That's not strange to them. That's how the world should be. That's their perception of the world. The idea of coming to a democratic, where the people vote for their government, a democratic place, and having civic duty, responsibility, and representing all Americans, that to them is absurd. They can't even conceive it, let alone practice it. So this brings us to the point of people gaining citizenship. Should people that gain, come as aliens and then gain citizenship, should they hold political office? Should there be a difference between people coming from places where civic duty and democracy are standard and normal, and civic responsibility, and say, well, you can hold political office, but if you come from a tribal third world shithole, then you can't hold political office if you gain citizenship, having been a migrant coming in. Should that be the case? That'll create, of course, screams, Nazi and fascist and white supremacy. But the reality is only white countries have that tradition of public service and civic duty. Only white countries have it. No other place in the world has it. And only people from those communities and societies who have long-standing lineage, they're only those people are capable of integrating into another society that has those values, the civic duties and responsibilities and so on. Not that it's a guarantee. I mean, look at the way Tony Blair in England, who has got long-standing roots in the British culture. He was more than willing to sell out the British public and the electorate. Look at George W. Bush was more than willing to sell out Americans, even though he's got long-standing ties in the United States, in the Northeast, and also in of course Texas. So it's not a guarantee, but given that the number of politicians entering Western parliaments will, over the next 25 years, become the majority, coming from these third world shithole countries, they'll become the majority, or likely to become the majority on current trends. Then we need to really rethink it today, right now. And I'm hoping President Trump takes these steps. So now we've got a situation where even the grandchildren of migrants still think they represent their ghetto diaspora, racial diaspora, still, three. So I don't know how many generations you need to go back to ensure that they're Americanized or Westernized, whether it be in Britain or Australia or the United States. Looking at the say the Indians and the Pakistanis, and I focus on the Indians at the moment. I've mentioned this many times before. Indians who are 5, 6, 7 generations on from Western born, or at least born outside of India. You ask them, remember 7 generations Western born, and you ask them, are they, oh, you're Australian, or no, I'm not. I'm Indian. And proud of it. I'm not Australian. Well, but you're 7 generations. No, I'm Indian, and my children will be Indian. And by the way, every generation that's born in Australia that we go back, we send back to India for a wife or a husband for the kid that's locally. Well, we won't even have our son marry a locally born Indian chick. Even that's not on. Has to be from there. We've got to keep the culture fresh and pure, just like our genetic DNA. If our daughter says she wants to date a white guy or marry a white guy, we'll excommunicate her from the family. She will be outcast. She must marry and procreate with an Indian guy from India. And that's just how it is. And so the Indians are very rigid. I mean, I'm not every single one. I'm sure you can find exceptions, but they're absolutely rigid on this. So, and even Indians like that in the 17 or 1800s might have procreated with a white guy, during the days of the Raj and all that sort of thing, a British guy. And they've got sort of, 5% of their genes are white. Even those people in India are considered outcast today. I mean, that's so racist the Indians are against people that don't have absolutely pure genetics. Now, so how many generations can you go back? With Indians, maybe it's never going to work. Maybe you could go back 20 generations. So a few things must happen, and I don't think there's any time left. I don't think we have time to ponder this in the West, because once the Indians and these parasite cultures get a majority in the electorate, and you wouldn't want to be a white you wouldn't want to be a white person back then at that time, because they'll just rape and plunder and pillage any bit of wealth that's there to stuff in their own pockets. When it's all gone, which it will be, when it's all gone, they'll just shrug their shoulders. Oh well, we had a good time while it lasted, and that'll be it. And the white people will be screwed and fucked. So, but I think at least 3, if not 4 generations, 5 generations even, that one of your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, so one of them must be locally born, American born. Now, if they want to marry a migrant or something, well, hey, but at least one must be locally born, born in the United States. And if you can't demonstrate that lineage, then you can't hold political office, would be my view. And that sounds sort of quite stringent, but the reality is that if it doesn't happen, that if we don't do that, then the entire body politic will be consumed by these third world parasites that are here to loot the treasury. Again, even the grandparents or the grandchildren of people that arrived from Mexico are talking in Latino accents and expecting and demanding handouts, for their own racial diaspora. If you can't represent Americans, then you shouldn't hold political office. But because the Mexicans are concentrated in the ghetto, then they can swing the vote and vote for one of theirs. You say, well, I'll loot the treasury for you. I'll get you lots of handouts. I'll parasite off the white people. Yay! Let's vote him into office. And that's effectively the message. Now, only white societies are capable of creating wealth on the scale that we've seen over the last several hundred years. Only white societies are capable of civic-minded public duty. Now, can you find an exception somewhere in the Spanish Hispanic diaspora? Sure, you can find somebody, but as a whole, only white people can do this, and so white countries, the only place these folks want to go to do their parasiting. There aren't other places where you can do it. Only white societies do, and they're helped and aided and abetted by the globalists. So I would argue that President Trump and his team really need to look at this very seriously. Now, you can look at, say, people like Dinesh D'Souza, who is clearly a very proud and nationalistic American, and he was born in he's a Christian, by the way, but he was born in India, and his folks are Indian, that sort of thing. But he's clearly integrated in American society. He's dated white chicks. He's married a Hispanic lady from South America, and so that's an example of someone's integrated. Can you find those sort of examples? Sure, you can. Nonetheless, when it comes to holding political office and you have the power to legislate, unless you're going to legislate on behalf of all Americans, then you shouldn't hold political office. If you're just going to legislate and act on behalf of your own racial diaspora, that was never foreseen as a possibility but now it's become a reality that has to be dealt with. And I would argue, going back 3, 4, 5 generations, saying at least one of your parents, your antecedents, has to be born in America, then that still allows the flexibility for but people to people still fall in love, for goodness sakes, to marry a migrant and procreate, but it doesn't. It prevents this idea that people have to be you're allowed to just come to America or come to the West. You get a naturalization certificate. Again, very low bar. There's not a stringent high bar for that at all. Certainly not in Australia anyway. And then hold political office and then legislate for your own racial diaspora. No. That has to go. It's very important it does. Now, other things can be put in place. So you can't have arranged marriages and arranged brides. So the Indians must be cut off from go back to the village of their ancestors, get husbands. They must be cut off from that. Must be stopped all over the Western world. If you want to marry another Indian and procreate with only Indians, well, fine, but you've got to do it with another locally born Indian. And that over generations would Americanize or Westernize the Indians. But as long as they can keep the culture and the genetics and everything and the attitudes all Indian fresh, then they will never be citizens of the West. So that needs to be addressed, or could be Pakistanis. But the next thing is to stop these Islamic republic folks, Pakistan, Bangladesh, for example, where cousin marriage. I think you can permit, say, marriage of third or fourth cousin, that sort of thing, but that's it. Outside of that, the idea of cousin marrying, that isn't going to happen, and prevent that. That would also encourage integration. But there should be, there has to be a very serious concerted effort to ensure integration of these people into the society. It's no good just screaming at white people saying, well, the reason is because all these white Nazis. That's bullshit. Everyone knows that. That's just absolute bullshit. That these other groups, they're very anti-white. They hate white people. They hate white society. They are only in the West to loot the Western treasury. That's all. And unless steps are taken to ensure that they're integrating and that those that hold political office are legislating on behalf of all Americans, or if in case of Britain or whatever, all British, unless that happens and clear steps are taken to do it, then we're all in a lot of trouble. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.